The Last of Us Part 2 is finally here, 7 years after the original hit shelves, and it is a huge game. Whether you jive with the story or not, this sequel is undeniably a masterclass in terms of design and detail, with the world of Naughty Dog's post-apocalyptic Seattle and beyond being absolutely packed with things to do and see. From the environments, to the character designs, to the moment-to-moment gameplay, the attention to detail on display is only rivaled by the likes of Rockstar Games. This isn't a list about references or Easter eggs though, those will be saved for another video, but those tiny little details caught and shared by eagle-eyed Redditors, other reviewers and myself that people probably spent way too much time on, but still blew our minds regardless. Sadly, there are no shrinking horseballs in The Last of Us Part 2, but these are almost as impressive. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and this is The Last of Us Part 2, 14 tiny details that'll blow your mind. And just as a warning, there are some early game spoilers here. Number 14, Ellie actually holds her breath underwater. The Last of Us Part 2's underwater gameplay is completely overhauled compared to the firsts, and this time around it no longer feels like you're trudging around through a bunch of sludge. Ellie can get in on the action as well now, diving underwater to get through flooded environments or to get the drop on enemies. Thankfully, these segments receive just as much attention as those on dry land, right down to Ellie actually holding her breath when submerged. This is most noticeable during the flashback sequences, perhaps because she's still learning how to swim then, where Ellie will hold her breath and puff her cheeks out slightly as a result. Usually going underwater is only represented by a breath meter, but it's cool to see this is also reflected in the character's body. Number 13, the guitar is fully functional. The acoustic guitar is one of the most powerful recurring items in The Last of Us Part 2, with Pearl Jam's Future Days and Aha's Take On Me each featuring at points during the story. During these moments, characters, mostly Ellie, will realistically pluck strings and respond to the player's strumming the touchpad on the correct chords. However, you can also freestyle at certain points as well, choosing whichever guitar setup you want and being able to pick any individual string. It's surprisingly complex, and it was only a matter of time before some skilled musicians out there started producing their own cover tracks of popular songs. There's a great VG 24/7 compilation that sees Ellie playing Hallelujah and Californication, and who knows which tunes, both new and original, will be recorded in the future. Number 12, Eugene's Porn Collection. Eugene, the lovable former Firefly pothead you tragically never get to meet in the game, was the kind of dude who knew exactly what his life was all about. In his little getaway inside a library near Jackson, Eugene had all the spoils he could ever want. A weed farm in the basement, Uncharted 2 on PlayStation 3, and most importantly, a butt ton of VHS porn. While playing, you probably already noticed the latter, and a dialogue prompt sees Ellie and Dina search through such classics as Smash Brandy's Cooch and Dong of the Wolf, itself a play on Dawn of the Wolf, a fictional movie that appears in both The Last of Us 1 and 2. But there are other tapes you can get a close-up of in photo mode as well. Ellie doesn't comment on the one she picks up, but a closer inspection reveals the title as Carmack the Pussy Slayer, with a runtime of 2 hours and 45 minutes. Number 11, the clocks actually work. This is the kind of thing you can only ever notice if you're specifically looking for it, but the digital clocks in The Last of Us Part 2 totally work. You can find one while playing as Ellie at one point, with the alarm clock being on a bedside table. Hang around in the room and the clock will slowly tick up in real time. Now, it's not quite as impressive as the watches in Call of Duty Modern Warfare displaying the real time of whichever time zone you're playing in, but it's still a cool detail nonetheless. Number 10, Ellie squints when you zoom with L2. Naughty Dog games have had characters react realistically to the environment in games before, most notably when they squint and shield their eyes when you shine a flashlight directly into their faces, you monster, but The Last of Us 2 builds on those animations. For instance, when you zoom in to get a better look at the environment, either by pressing L3 when prompted or L2, Ellie will actually squint to focus her eyes. This is best done in front of a mirror so you won't have to wrestle with the controls. What makes this detail so mind-blowing though is that there's a 99% chance you never actually notice it in gameplay. It being a third-person experience and all, you're mostly positioned behind Ellie's head, especially if you're zooming in to look at a detail in the distance. Even when you're looking in the mirror, it's tough to actually notice her face changing. There are a few other Ellie-specific animations as well you might not know about. For instance, if you leave her idle, she'll occasionally tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, which then becomes dislodged when she starts jumping or fighting. Likewise, if you stop moving for a second while it's raining, she'll cover her head with her hoodie and pull it back down when entering a building. Finally, in the second flashback, you'll also notice that her tattoo is yet to be completed. Number 9. Self-preservation in combat. This is a more general one, but the way enemies react to you shooting, stabbing, murdering, exploding, and setting fire to them has an almost creepy attention to detail. While some of these features have already been covered in reviews, for instance the way enemies will shout out the names of their fallen comrades, there are a couple smaller ones that are context specific. For instance, Molotov cocktails are more dangerous than ever, and can ignite enemies even on the edge of the impact radius. These victims won't die, but you'll be able to watch as they take damage and try to pat themselves down to put the flames out. Also, sometimes if you murder an entire group, the final enemy will drop to their knees and beg for their life, allowing for a particularly gruesome melee kill. Exploded infected won't always instantly die either, and both regular runners and more advanced types will continue to crawl towards you even with no legs. Finally, dogs will also mourn their owners in combat rather than attack you sometimes as well, which leads us nicely onto number 8, Bear's Fate. To be honest with you, this was a detail that I totally missed in my first playthrough, but you can't blame me. Chances are the first time through The Last of Us 2 you're going to be killing a whole load of dogs. You might not feel good about it, but the way they can follow your scent makes them extremely dangerous, and they've got to be dispatched quickly so you can sneak around the environment without being hounded. Of course, in its attempt to humanize every single enemy in the game, the second half spends a good chunk of time making you feel bad for doing this. The first example comes when you're introduced to Alice, one of the only dogs you're forced to kill in a particularly brutal manner, might I add, to advance the story. There is another named canine though called Bear. There's a good chance you'll shoot this one early on as Ellie and hear its owner cry out its name in response. Later on, while playing as Abby, you'll be reintroduced to the animal who, by all accounts, is a pretty good boy. Number 7. PS3s are friendly. This is more fun than a proper technical mindblower, but it's still worth mentioning. At multiple points during the game, you can find PS3 consoles complete with other Naughty Dog releases out in the wild. This isn't much of a secret, but what you might not know is that the game actually classes these machines as friendly allies. If you hover the aim and reticule over the console, it will actually fade, restricting you from pulling the trigger on it. The same is true for the Vita, but of course not the Vita's owner. A cute little in-joke or precious censorship to avoid a bunch of videos showing players shooting up Sony's dear consoles? I'll leave that one up to you. Number 6, the insane rope physics. The puzzles in The Last of Us 2 aren't exactly difficult. In fact, you could make the argument that the game thinks you're an absolute moron. Answers to riddles are always spoon-fed to you, and you don't need to do much thinking to get from place to place. That said, the environmental puzzles are still incredibly satisfying to solve, because most of them rely on common sense, simple common sense thinking that often isn't taken into account by games. Rarely is the simplest answer the right one when it comes to gaming puzzles, but it often is in The Last of Us 2. That's made possible primarily because of the realistic rope physics. You'll use these to reach areas you couldn't get to, throw them over obstacles to plug in generators, or tie knots around certain structures. Fans have already begun testing just how far they can push this idea, causing all kinds of tangles and knots in the process. It's something that shouldn't be anywhere near as fun as it is to mess with, but I would be lying if I said it wasn't. Number 5. There's different dialogue depending on the order you complete actions. This is another subtle one, but again shows how this time around Naughty Dog have tried to account for the player's own agency as much as possible. Not only does in-game dialogue account for how far away the characters are from each other, or whether an activity will interrupt a conversation, but it will also take into consideration the order you actually accomplish tasks in. For instance, while switching the power on back at the theatre, Ellie will come across the corpse of the location's former tenant, fried in front of the circuit box. You can interact with the corpse and Ellie will make a comment on his fate, but this will slightly alter depending on whether or not you turn the power on before hitting triangle. It's not a huge deal, but the fact that the alteration takes into account the order of events is probably far more effort than Naughty Dog needed to put in. Number 4, you can realistically crack the safes. Now I admit this is one that I would never have noticed without much smarter people pointing it out on Reddit, but you can actually crack every single safe in The Last of Us 2 without having the correct numerical code. If you slowly move the different numbers on each safe, you can listen out for a subtle audio cue that lets you know when you've hit the correct number. It's not totally easy to hear unless you know what you're listening for, as it's a subtle shift in pitch, but once you do, you can show off by living out your wildest safe cracker dreams. Number 3. Ellie's room. Pretty much everything in Ellie's room, both at the beginning and end of the game, is a major Easter egg in some way. While most are obvious, for instance the toy she retrieved for Sam in the first game being propped up on a dresser, there are a few subtle ones hiding away. For instance, there's a snow globe in there, which was caught in a great PlayStation Access video that, upon closer inspection, reflects the winter chapter in the first title. It might just be a coincidence, but hunting the deer in the snow was such an iconic part of that segment, and it makes far more sense for it to be intentional. In general though, the next time you're playing, just take a good look around this room, as there's a whole bunch of secrets to be found. Number 2. Joel is reading An Idiot's Guide to Space for Ellie. Spoilers ahead. Okay, so this one is kinda heartbreaking. After Joel dies, you'll get the opportunity to mourn him by searching his now vacant house before setting off on your quest for revenge. While you probably noticed a lot of the bigger details here, the pictures of idyllic Jackson life, the iconic photo of Joel and Sarah, the backpack, the jacket, the guitars, there is one innocuous detail in there that will absolutely ruin you. That's because if you look at Joel's bedside table, you'll notice a book titled An Idiot's Guide to Space, positioned next to some reading glasses. Of course, Ellie's love of outer space is a defining part of her character, and one of the best moments in the sequel comes later when Joel takes her to a space museum for her birthday. Here she regales him with facts and trivia, as it's not a topic that's interested him before. This detail then is a reminder of just how much Joel cared about Ellie. Even when they weren't talking during this period, he was still engaging with the things that she loved. Whether it was simply because it reminded him of her, or if her enthusiasm genuinely brushed off on him, it's a great example of how they both changed each other's lives. Number 1. Backpack items get wet after swimming. Water actually affecting characters has always been a weirdly satisfying joy in video games. The first time new titles properly started implementing a system whereby only a portion of a character's clothes submerged in water would actually get wet, it was, and I do not say this lightly, the stuff of dreams. Wet dreams, if you will. But Naughty Dog have now taken this to a new level. In The Last of Us Part 2, if you swim through Seattle, your backpack will accordingly get wet. However, what's even more impressive is that the contents of the backpack will be similarly drenched. When you're done swimming, pull out a note and you'll notice that it's damp, and it will only dry over time as your character does. Please, someone in the comments tell me that I'm not just being weird about this. This honestly blew my mind and I can't stop thinking about it. So that's our list. Want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Were there any crazy details like this that I totally missed? I would love to do a follow-up to this because I feel like Red Dead Redemption, it's going to be a game that we keep talking about over and over again. Either way, while you're down there, can you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.